好，感谢大家在周四的晚上参加我们每个月一次的固定的关于遗产信托方面的讲座。我们今天讲座的内容呢是遗产与房产税务相关的一些问题。那在今天讲座的开始呢，我先自我介绍一下，我是李小薇律师是瑞诚律师事务所的合伙人律师。然后另外一位律师也是我们今天晚上讲座的主讲律师呢是 Michael Lee 律师。那我们请 Michael Lee 律师跟大家打一个招呼，做一下自我介绍。Michael, can you introduce yourself?
Greetings all. It's a pleasure to be with you again for our beginning of our fall seminars. It's getting cold. I'm Mike Lee. I'm one of the founding partners of the firm. We practice estate planning and tax work, background work for the U.S. Attorney's Office, Internal Revenue Service, and I've been in private practice for a very long time now. So great to be with you all.
Great, thanks, Michael. 首先呢，在今天我们讲座的开始，我们老规矩啊，每一次我们做每个月固定的讲座的时候，我们都会把这个月的热点的一个我们认为的和遗产信托相关的一个话题和大家分享一下。今天呢，我们想跟大家分享的一个话题就是关于离婚。如果你在离婚的过程当中，如果说你遇到了这个离婚的情况的话，你应该怎样的去处理自己的遗产信托方面的问题？那这个引出的这个热点呢，当然是这段时间一直在中国大陆占据头条的一个新闻，就是汪峰和章子怡离婚这件事情。那由此引出的呢，我看到啊，我们的客户在当然就是这个离婚是很多人会经历的一件事情。在离婚的过程当中呢，其实很多人会忽略的一点就是你的遗产信托规划方面的问题。那如果说呢，你在离婚之前，你在婚姻过程当中已经有做过遗产信托文件呢，那其实你需要注意的一点是，你在 file for divorce，在向法院申请离婚的时候，第一件事情可能是要注意的是说，你要把你的遗产信托的文件，就是在婚姻当中你做的遗产信托的文件呢，首先要把它全部撤销，因为在婚姻当中，你可能指定的很多的，比如说信托的管理人、你的授权书的 agent，像这些都会是指定你的配偶去做。那 obviously， 如果你要是离婚的话，那你可能就不希望你的配偶去承担这样的角色，也不希望你的配偶在你发生任何事情的时候，在离婚的过程当中可以继承到你的财产。那所以呢，你第一件事要做的，除了就是正常的走这个离婚的程序之外呢，如果你之前有做过遗产信托规划的话，你要来见遗产信托律师，把你之前所做的遗产信托规划给撤销掉。那同时呢，要做一份新的规划。那这份新的规划呢，在你的财产没有被法院正式的完成分割之前呢，可能所做的不多，可能没有办法去做一些，比如说完整的一些信托规划这些的，但是至少呢，你可以去做相应的一些文件，比如说像遗嘱。像 POA 这样的文件可以表达自己的意愿，说，我不希望我的配偶可以参与到，假设我有任何失去意识行为能力或者去世的情况，去参与到我的财产的管理分配当中。那如果说你在离婚之前你没有做过任何的规划的话，那你首要的要考虑的就是说你要马上把你的信托规划给做好，把你的遗产规划给做好。那在你的遗产规划当中，当然也是要不要指定。就是把配偶呢完全的排除到你的遗产的管理和继承之外啊，因为我们看到过之前是有案例，就是客户没有去做相应的遗产规划，但是在离婚过程当中，人很不幸的就是心脏病突发去世。那如果说出现这种情况的话，虽然配偶和你已经在离婚当中，但是你的离婚还没有被法院正式的去判决，那你的配偶还是有可能去继承到和管理到你的财产和资产的。所以呢，在这里就特别提醒大家，今天我们参加我们讲座的朋友，相当于给大家分享一下啊，这个我们认为非常非常有用的。如果说你身边有离婚的朋友，然后你自己如果正在经历离婚的话，你一定要注意，要考虑到你的遗产信托的规划。OK，那个美婷，我们可不可以看一下？因为，我看我在讲话的时候，那个图片也一直是 Michael，他这个是有 就是我不知道它这个是什么问题，好像这个画面一直是给在 Michael 这边。你可以看一下啊，but it doesn't matter。那个接下来我们就来进入到正题，我们今天要跟大家分享的关于房产上税务的一些问题。那虽然房产是我们资产组成的一部分，但是在我们经手的案件当中，我觉得是我们华人客户里面，我觉得是最重要的财产的组成的部分。一个房产，即使你一个房产的话，其实上面涉及到的税务的问题呢也是非常多的。那税务呢分很多种类啊。那今天呢我们就具体的给大家解析一下，就是在一套房产当中，从遗产继承、遗产规划的这角度来看的话，有哪些的税务的问题我们需要注意。那首先呢，我觉得第一个我们要讲的就是 property tax。property tax 是在房产当中我觉得最特殊的，就是针对于房产这类资产的特殊的一个税务类别 property tax。我们先请 Michael 先简单的给大家介绍一下 What is property tax? And when will property tax occur?
Yes. So everyone who owns real estate has, twice a year encountered property tax. So what is property tax? Generally, when we speak about property tax, we mean the state and local, this is generally administered by the counties, tax on real property, real estate. If you own a business, there's also one of these taxes on personal property, but we're just going to be talking about real property. So this is the tax that generally occurs when one acquires real property, when there's that change of ownership. Upon the change of ownership from seller to buyer, there will be set the base value. That's the initial value of the real property. And then from there, the counties will apply the appropriate rate. That's generally about 1%, 1.1, but it depends because there can be tack-on taxes of the base county rate plus the city plus particular school district, plus if you're in a Melrose district, and there can be these tack-ons. So sometimes when you get that thing that says special assessment, that's more tax. So there's this base value, and then every year, twice a year, you pay that 1% fractional tax to the county.
OK， 所以刚才 Michael 提到的，其实我觉得很重要的一个概念就是 change of ownership。一般来讲的话，在你的房子改变所有者、改变所有权的时候 ，property tax 你的地税就会被重新评估。那我们生活在美国，我们每个人都知道，就是说你的地税是每一年 annually 都要去缴付的。所以如果说你的地税的税基改变的话，实际上是一个非常深远的一个影响啊。就是说它不是一次就是这个就一次性你就缴完了，而是一旦它改变了税基了之后的话，它是每一年你都要去缴，可能你的这个地税都会增加。那由此引申的一个问题就是，经常我们的客户会问说，What if I change my property from my own name to the revocable living trust? Will that change the property tax basis? 就是如果税基如果你刚才Michael讲就是说改变所有权，那如果说我的房产的所有权由个人或者由夫妻两个人个人的名字改成信托的话，这个会改变税基吗？
So this is asking a very interesting question, and which is key to understand about property taxes and why we have to be careful. So once I acquire the property tax year over year generally cannot increase by more than 2%. In some situations, no more than 1%. So if I buy the property at $1 million, it should stay 1% of $1 million with minor variations going up, the value going up just based on that 1 percentage point. What can trigger big problems with this? So I say, Mike, I bought the property 10 years ago. The value has gone up. The property taxes haven't gone up. Everything looks good. Where can be the problem? The problem can be if I change ownership. So if I sell it, the buyer's not going to have the same property tax as me. The buyer will have the tax calculated based on the fair market value at the time that they acquire it when there's the change of ownership. But that's an obvious example. Change of ownership, buyer, seller, arm's length transaction, unrelated parties. What about the other variations? So the example posed here is, what if I grant the property to a revocable living trust? Does my grant to the revocable living trust for estate planning purposes constitute a change of ownership? No. Why does it not constitute a change of ownership? Because the California Revenue and Tax Code says it doesn't. Section 62, particularly Section 62D of the Revenue and Tax Code, says that if I grant it into a revocable living trust that's revocable, and I'm the beneficiary of that trust, so it's revocable and I'm the beneficiary, that is not a change of ownership. So the vast majority of revocable living trusts, no change of ownership. As we'll talk about couple minutes, there are a variety of potential options that are excluded transfers, that it's a change of ownership, but that change of ownership is excluded. So in addition to revocable living trust, if I grant to a business entity like an LLC, and that LLC is, the ownership of the LLC is exactly the same proportion on the resulting end as it was on the beginning end, there's no change of ownership. So if it was Mike Lee and Mike Lee's wife, we're 50-50, and then we grant it into an LLC, and it's 50% Mike and 50% wife, we're okay. If we have, let's say, we acquired the property with friends, we have Mike, Susan, and Tom, and we're 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 on the property title, and then we grant it to an LLC, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, no change of ownership, proportionally the same. What if we do it this way? We say, well, somebody needs to do the LLC, to manage the LLC, so the property is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, and then we grant it into the LLC, and we do 33%, 33%, 34%, change of ownership. We changed the ownership. It was not precisely 33.333 repeating on and on and on. So you have to be careful, and that's a good illustration of, if you do proportional changes, it has to be down to the minute fraction exactly the same. You can't say, well, we'll have Susan, she's very good at managing things, she'll be 34% and we'll each be 33. No. When you change proportion, you changed ownership. So you have to be very, very careful. If you're using an exemption, you're going to change ownership and you're going to use an exemption, you have to fit bang in squarely to the exemption. Variations there cause a problem, and you will not be granted the exclusion.
看来这个改变所有权真的是一个非常非常需要精细到每一个法条法律的 code 里面的一个很具体的一个问题啊。但是刚才Michael特别提到了，就是说，如果说你的资产转移到了这个你自己的可撤销生前信托，以及说如果说特定的这个 LLC 的设定，如果说完全不改变所有权的话，那实际上呢，在法条里面它是有明确的去规定说这个不会改变你的 property tax 的 basis。但是至于其他的一些情况呢，可能也是符合就是额外的一些 exclusions， 但是要具体的情况去具体的分析。但是它的一个 general rule 就是，如果你改变了 ownership 的话，你会可能你的这个房子的 property tax basis 就可能会被重新的评估。那我们知道呢，就是在 Proposition 19之后，19号地税法案之后，其实从加州来看，整个地税从遗产继承的角度来讲的话，也是非常复杂的。因为彻底的改变了这个子女继承父母的房产的地税免被评估的之前的这样的一个法律的框架啊，也具体有很多的不同的一些规定以及例外不同的情况。能不能简单的请 Michael 介绍一下 After Proposition 19 if children inherit the property from parents, what will happen? Will children still keep parents' low property tax basis, or the property tax will be reassessed。就是我请 Michael 讲一下，就是在我们知道，就是大概2年以前 Prop 19 pass 了以后，就是其实对于房产的继承方面有很多的不利，以及有一些不好的一些影响啊，当然也有很多积极的好的一些影响，但是就是今天就是侧重从子女继承父母的房产的这个角度来讲，请 Michael 讲一下 After Prop 19它有哪些新的一些改变。
So perfect. Just like we mentioned before, the exclusion for proportionality, there is an exclusion for primary residences passing from parents to children, where that of course is a change of ownership. It went from parent to child for primary residence, and it will exclude $1 million of increase between the base assessment, the adjusted base assessment, and the fair market value at the time of the transfer. So the first thing to know about the new Prop 19 that we've had since the year 2021, new Prop 19, first thing to know is this, the simple rule, but it's a bad rule. All of my rental real estate in California, when I pass away and it goes to my kids, that's all going to be reassessed. All of it. There's no Prop 58 exemption anymore. Prop 58 was superseded and abolished by Prop 19. So the idea back in that used to be the situation where my primary residence, I got 100% exclusion parent to child, and my rentals, it depended on the value of the rentals. That's all gone. All the rentals will be reassessed for property taxes when they go from parent to child, because that's a change of ownership and there's no exclusion. The only exclusion that now is granted is the Prop 19 exclusion, and it works like this, and we have to be very, very careful because the counties are interpreting this vastly more strictly than I ever expected. I'm shocked because in 2021, which is kind of classic for tax authorities, they say, we're not going to be that brutal. It's not going to be that bad. And then they said, money, and they're brutal. So what's the rule? It works like this. So for parent, let's just say, we'll make it simple, that surviving spouse has already passed away. It's just one parent is living, and then it's going to descend down to the two kids. If we have the two kids. So we have two kids. So I pass away. It's going to be change of ownership, my primary residence to the two kids. First rule about this is it must be my primary residence. What does this mean? First of all, I have to have my homeowner's exclusion, that negative $7,000, that thing, that has to be declared with the county tax assessor. So you have to make sure that that is placed on the property that's the primary residence. Be extremely careful with this, because a lot of people say, oh yeah, Mike, I know where it is. I know that I've done it. Well, if you have a couple of houses and you've moved once or twice, it may not be where you think it is. You may not have it placed appropriately. In addition to this, be extremely careful. I've been shocked how rough the counties have been on families with this. Okay, I just have one property. I claim the primary residence there. I have the homeowner's exclusion. The question is, as Mike, I'm senior Mike, I'm in my 90s now, the counties now check is, where was Mr. Lee living for the last years of his life? Particularly if I'm living with my kids and not living in my house because maybe I'm too old, and it's maybe safer for me to live with my daughter, perhaps. We have to actually be very careful with this, because we essentially have to maintain my connection to that house's primary residence in terms of that homeowner's exclusion, but also in the facts of my connection to that house. Even if I only own one house, I had battling Santa Clara now. The person was old, had very severe dementia and Alzheimer's, moved to assisted living. Of course, it was easier to collect his mail and to prevent it from being intercepted. Sent the mail to the assisted living place, sent the tax returns to the assisted living place, all of that. The person, of course, had severe dementia, eventually passed away. Death certificate listed his final address as the assisted living place. The family went to claim the property. This is the only property that this person's ever owned, by the way. They don't have any rentals. They only own this one house in San Jose. Claim it as the family home, the primary residence. Santa Clara said, no. His primary residence was the assisted living facility. family says he didn't own the assisted living facility. He was just living there because he had really bad dementia and he needed help. Said, wasn't living in his house. Law says has to live in his house. Should have died in his house. He died at the assisted living place. Death certificate says he died in the assisted living place. Tax return says his house was assisted living place. Bills, assisted living place. Prop 19 doesn't qualify. I'd love to say argued it out and they relented. No, they say we're not going to grant it. Reassessed. So you have to be very careful with this planning long time for seniors of how you arrange their living, how do you arrange the continuation of that claim that it was their primary residence if their living situation is somewhat flexible. I've been shocked how strictly and inequitably this is being enforced. Even for people who say, I own no other real property, that was always the family house. We all grew up there. It was supposed to be for the kids. They say, Grandpa, you got to drag him through the threshold and make sure he dies in there and make sure his mail's going there. Because if he dies someplace else and the mail's going someplace else, unless you can prove something that it was only transitory, that he was staying there, you have to prove the intent to go. It's a bizarre and really bad rule. It says you have to prove that there was an intent to go back to the house. The rule makes no sense. When I'm 95 years old with severe dementia, living in assisted living, I plan to go that way. I don't plan to go to my house. I don't have an intent to return to my house. They say, no, you need to show intent to go back to the house. Like your bills still go there, your tax, that suddenly I'm just going to say, oh, Elon Musk is going to invent something. I'm going to live forever and I'm going to go back to the house. You have to think like that because that's the way the law is written. In addition to this, I can also only protect $1 million of increase. So if my property, I bought it 1 million, or I bought it 300,000. At the time of my passing, it's 1 million. Let's say my assessed value is still 300,000. At the time I pass, it's 1.3 million. Kids, no reassessment. But if it's 1.4 million, it adds the overage, that $100,000 overage gets tacked onto the bottom. Their assessment is now 400,000. Still good, but it drops down. It's only 1 million. It's not unlimited. So the rule is very, very different than it used to be, and this will require working with some planning with your estate planning attorneys, because it's not just, well, I'll just do this document or I'll just file this thing with the recorder, it will be okay. You have to also kind of plan your lifestyle. Am I producing the right evidence and doing the right thing so as not to get into trouble later?
所以看来 Proper 19之后，其实变化真的是蛮大的，在这方面，就是刚才 Michael 有提到，一个是 rental property，就是你的出租房的话，肯定是会你的小孩继承之后是会被重新评估的。那另外一个，即使是自住房，那刚才 Michael 也讲了说，其实有很严格的要求，就是怎么去定义自住房。然后另外一个就是说，这个增加的金额也不能说是超过100万。那如果超过100万，超过100万的部分的话，也会被重新评估。所以 I think this is consistent with we always feel the counties are very strict in enforcing the property tax rules. Obviously, after Property 19, I think this just further proves that we see a lot of cases. The county is very firm in their positions.
Yes,
okay.
and
Yeah.
this Prop 19. The other thing is, which is also required when the property descends down to the kids, one of those kids must make that property his or her primary residence. So this is the other thing. If my two kids already have houses and they say, well, I live here and I live there, they actually, within 1 year of my passing, have to move to the family house. They have to change like their driver's license, their tax returns, all these things, and claim that as their primary residence. And then that they will qualify for the exclusion. As soon as they leave and they move someplace else, then it gets reassessed. So it is now very, very narrow and a very, very rigid rule on this property tax reassessment exclusion. It is not generous like it used to be at all.
所以对小孩是否住在这个房子里面，其实也是有要求的啊。所以这个里面就特别提醒大家，就是在你做 房产继承的时候，其实是要考虑到房产税相关的一些问题的。其实这也就促使了我们有很多的客户，在考虑自己，尤其是晚年的时候，你的财产的组成的时候，如果说全部都是房地产，或者说是你的大部分的资产都是房地产的话，实际上你是要考虑一些方式去怎么去 diversify，就是因为这个在 property tax 方面确实，基于目前的情况的话，是有很多难以去规划的一些情况的。那其实呢，我觉得另外一方面就是 Property 19它本身的有一个相对来讲比较积极的一个方面，可能就是去置换房子，就是你人年纪大了以后，如果说你想换一个房子，因为像很多年纪大的人，他可能都会想要 downsize，就以前可能你住。比如说3、4千 square feet 的一个房子，但是现在到年纪大了，你可能就想给它换成一个 condo，甚至我们的很多客户他是想说，搬到像有一些条件比较好的，有一些这种老年人的社区啊，然后可能就是房子小一点，比较好打理的，可能没有院子啊，这样等等。哦，那Michael 可不可以讲一下，就是 after Property 19, if I want to move to a different house at when I'm older. Can I take my property tax basis with me？就是否还是可以 keep 以前的我的，因为你可能几十年前以前买的房子的这个税基 property tax basis 是非常低的，那你现在 obviously 在过去的几年当中，房价涨的真的是很多，那我年纪大了以后又没有太多的收入，我要配每年的这个 property tax。这么多的话，对于年纪大的人也是一个负担。那 After Property 19，请 Michael 介绍一下，目前如果我要置换房子 ，property tax 这个是怎么来去算的？
So this is one of these maybe good things of Prop 19 is it did harmonize the system amongst all of the California counties, is that if you are over 55 or disabled in certain categories, and I want to essentially sell this house and move to another house, I can bring my property tax basis with me. But of course, this isn't California taxation if this isn't highly limited and highly, charged with potential problems. One of the first things is that someone says, "Oh, great, I'll sell this house. I'm over 55. I'll sell this house and I'll buy a big, beautiful house and bring my property tax assessment with me." Not going to work, because the way this is written, the property basis transfer is when I move, I have to take the fair market value of the house that I'm living in. Essentially, I need to get an appraisal on this, and then say, okay, it's $1,500,000, and then the new house that I buy needs to be $1,500,000 or lower to bring the property tax basis with me. If I buy a $4 million house, I'm not going to be able to bring it with me in the same way, because they say you're not downsizing, you're not trying to make things better or you get liquidity, you're upgrading. If you're upgrading, you pay. We're going to tax that. We're really trying to do the situation of saying, oh, this 4-bedroom house, with stairs and everything, this is too much house for me. I'd like to buy a nice little condo. My house is 1.5 million. I'd like to sell this. I'm going to buy a $500,000 condo, and I'm going to keep the million basically for my retirement, and I'm going to live off of that. And let's say my current house is has a lower basis than 500,000. Let's say I bought it at 300,000. I really want to keep that 300. That I can do. I can bring that $300,000 to my $500,000 house, or let's say $800,000. It's half the value of what I'm buying. That's available, but I can't essentially upgrade to a fancier, more expensive house than what I already have. So this is also requires a lot of work to prepare, because again, you have multiple transactions that you're going to sell and then you're going to buy, and you want to carry over the tax assessment. So this is a complicated transaction that requires guidance. Unfortunately, California has not established, which is unfortunate and frustrating about this, unlike like the IRS has for a number of these things, what are called safe harbors. Safe harbors in federal IRS tax practices, basically the IRS for some things like charitable remainder trusts or things like this, they say, we will tell you exactly how to do it. We'll literally produce forms, and we'll produce the law guidance that says if you do it exactly the way we tell you in these 19 steps, we will guarantee you will get the relief at the end. Prop 19 doesn't have this. So you have to just follow the law very, very carefully and then potentially argue with the assessors going through to make sure you get it. There isn't sort of like a model perfect transaction where you can say, I'm going to model it exactly like this and then get like pre-approval, and then I'm going to sell my house and buy. I have to just follow the way the code says. So it's a little bit iffier than like a safe harbor system.
OK， 所以如果说你要在置换房子的时候当然现在是有可能可以 keep 住你当时买的你的旧房子的这个比较低的 property tax basis， 但是刚才 Michael 也强调了，那也是你要在做每一步的时候都是要非常的注意，非常小心。然后另外一个就是说，这个你的新房子，因为你是 downside， 它主要的它的背后这个法律背后是要就是给年纪大的人他们 downsizing 提供一定的福利，所以说你所谓的 downsizing 就是当然你要买的房子的价格不能超过你现在的这个房子的 fair market value。那所以这个上面也是有一定的要求的，就是在这里面简单的给大家介绍一下啊。刚才我们 property tax 花了很长的时间，因为呢，这也是我们的客户最常遇到的问题之一那所以呢，在这里面就特别多花一点时间给大家讲。那我想，在房子上第二类税，我们经常看到的就是我们这个 move on to the second subject， 就是关于 income tax 的问题。那房子除了自住房之外，如果说你有2个或者2个以上的房产的话，那大部分人会选择把自己的房子给出租出去。那出租呢，就势必会产生你的租金收入，那租金的收入当然也就会算成你的 income。那现在又是年底的时候，就大家做 tax planning 的时候，所以就请 Michael 简单的介绍一下，给大家讲一下你看到的，因为我们也做一些 trust tax return， 那 trust 里面 obviously 有的时候也会有一些rental properties in it， 那就请 Michael 讲一下说，你觉得需要提示大家，关于 rental income 这个部分 income tax 这个部分有什么需要特别需要去注意的？
Essentially, the rental income is a little bit challenging. The income tax is generally one that is difficult to plan to mitigate. It's intentionally like that. A few of the things that are common suggestions, which are the classic things that your accountant and tax advisors are advising that one should be mindful of, is of course to take depreciation appropriately. You can take depreciation on real property. So depending on residential, often it's a 30-year life, commercial is often a 37-year life. And you can take this depreciation. That will mitigate income. Also, certain deductible expenses. So things that are maintenance of the property. If one, while one has a renter, you may not necessarily want to defer maintenance for later. Do the maintenance now, so you front load the expenditure with the income and match deduction to income. So those are very good things. But then do be careful with the depreciation, which we'll talk about in a moment, is capital gains tax with depreciation recapture. Because as you depreciate, you erode basis. And as you erode basis, that may come back when you go to sell the property because the basis is lower than what you had paid. Why? Because you were taking depreciation over time. Also, do make sure when you look at your Schedule D on your tax return, your 1040, to make sure that you are taking depreciation. Every once in a while, I come across someone who self-prepares the return and isn't taking depreciation. Or they're putting like the rental is on Schedule C as like business income and not real estate income. And it's essentially they're calculating it in a way for worse treatment. So if you prepare your own returns, it's sometimes helpful to get it double checked to make sure that you're maximizing everything that you can get. Most software does pretty well on guiding you on that, but every once in a while I see kind of a missed opportunity there. So something to take a look at.
所以就是在你做 房屋收入这一块，刚才 Michael 特别提到的是一个折旧，怎么去处理折旧的问题，以及如果说你做了很多的 depreciation 折旧的话，到后来等一下我们要讲这个 capital gain tax 的时候，这个可能你的这个房子的 basis 就是你的这个税基就会降低，那这个中间有一些这种计算啊这些的是你需要去注意的。那正好讲到 income tax，我其实想问 Michael 一个问题，就我们的客户里面特别多的就是因为我们生活在湾区，好多客户都是属于高收入人群那你的本身工资 salary W2 可能就拿得很高，然后再加上你的比如说你的这个刚才我们讲的这个 rental income，这个房屋这些收入，那现在利息比较高，有些人又有一些这个利息的收入，然后还有一些其他的投资的这些收入，那到最后呢，都会变成你要去缴的一部分的税款。那所以很多客户都会问说，你有没有什么方法？如果我的 income tax 特别高 ，I have very high income tax，any planning I can do to lower my income tax? For example, I think a popular one 有一个特别 popular 的就是客户都会问到的一个，就是说我要不要去做一些 charitable donation？那 I think next month we'll do a special seminar about charitable donation, but can you just give our audience a brief introduction about the charitable giving and what is your position on this and what kind of people they need to consider charitable giving?
Charitable giving is usually a strategy for very high income earners who are generally in the top income tax brackets, who are then also subject to the alternative minimum tax. So what is this? Is I'm already in the top bracket because I'm a high earner. And then because I'm a high earner, my tax return gets run through that additional schedule that you may have seen, the AMT schedule, that basically takes away all my deductions. And the AMT limits severely all of my deductions and then says, and which is hilarious because it's called the alternative minimum tax, and it's all a lie. It's not alternative, it's mandatory, and it's not minimum, it's higher. So, of course, Congress calls it the alternative minimum tax, like, oh, it's this alternative lesser tax. No, it's a mandatory higher tax. But they call it the AMT. So if you're subject to AMT and you're high income, oftentimes you may want to take a look at charitable giving because the way that the charitable deduction works, it can sometimes help you with AMT issues for this. Because the charitable is a different kind of deduction here. So essentially what it is saying, well, I'm going to have to pay somebody. I have to pay either the IRS or to something that I care about. And a lot of persons in the higher net wealth areas would prefer to pay something that one cares about. How is this done? One could just write a big check to the Red Cross, or if anyone has kids in private school, they'll certainly let you know that they're willing to take some money. They're happy to do that. But a lot of people prefer to do this. Think about things like charitable charitable lead trusts or private foundations. So the private foundation, you can contribute money into the private foundation, but you don't have to put all of it in the hands of the charity in year one. You just have to give the minimum, sometimes 5%, to the charity, hold it in the private foundation, and dole it out over time as one sees fit. You can never take the money back, and you can never benefit from the money yourself, private inurement. That's absolutely fatal. But if you say, no, I'm not going to do any of those untoward things, it belongs to the charity, and I'm going to use it as such, that can be a good direction. Same thing with the charitable lead trust. There are ways that one can take the charitable deduction now and front load the charitable deduction, give to the charity over time. And then, interestingly enough, the remainder from there, that can flow back to the family, and you can get some benefit from charitable lead trusts. So those are in play and can be used there.
所以刚才 Michael 有介绍这个 charitable lead trust 的 non-profit 的，包括 private foundation 这些我们常见的。还有一个就是最近我也听到很多我们的客户在问啊，在咨询，就是那个 donor advice fund，也是其中的一个就是大家经常去咨询，就是有各种各样的不同的形式去做 charitable giving，其实最关键的就是哪一种形式更适合你。但 in any case， 我觉得一个中心思想也是我们事务所一直跟我们所有的客户去讲的，就是当然大家做 charitable giving 的一个主要的目的当然是想说也要去 lower 我的 tax， 但是我觉得最重要的目的之一了，也有就是说你是有一个真实的真正的去在做这个 charitable giving， 而不应该是一个不真实的一个 charitable giving 啊。这个以前我们有的客户出现过这样的情况，包括一些 non-profit 的和一些这个 private foundation 出现一些不合规的情况。那如果出现这种情况的话，实际上对你的税务包括以后很多年，这个都会造成很多的困扰的。所以我觉得我们一直就讲的就是说，其实两个部分你都要有，一个是you have a true charitable purpose， and second is for tax savings, right, Michael?
Yeah, you've got to have the desire, because it also doesn't deduct dollar for dollar. It deducts about a third. So you do actually have to care about this thing. So because you don't get perfectly dollar for dollar, but they can be in play for the right families.
Great. 如果说你对 charitable giving 这部分感兴趣的话，下个月呢，我们还会专门的去做一场关于 charitable giving 的一个讲座，这个是我们下个月的一个主题啊。因为年底的时候，就像 Michael 讲的，我们的很多客户都在咨询这个问题，很多的 private school 这个都需要 donation 呢。很多我们的客户都是一些家长呢，都会想说，哎，如果我要捐款的话，以怎样的一种形式去捐会比较好一些？所以我们也会跟大家分享一些这方面的一些知识。如果你有兴趣的话呢，也可以 sign up for our next webinar。那接下来呢，第三个税呢，我就想接着 Michael 刚才反正已经提到了一点点啊，就是关于 capital gain tax 的问题，资产增值税，我们中文讲的资产增值税的问题。那资产增值税一般在什么样的情况会产生呢？就是一般是你需要卖房产的时候，你要把房子给卖掉，那你的房子的 fair market value 现在是很高了，那你当时买房的价格呢是很低的，那你的现在的房子的 fair market value 和你当时买房的税基的差价，就是我们讲的 capital gain。就我刚才用最简单的语言给大家讲了一下什么是 capital gain。那在 capital gain tax 方面呢，有一些方法，包括很多的一些 CPA 机构都会在 promote 一些不同的一些方法去 lower 你的 capital gain tax， 包括去避税啊这样等等。我想大家耳熟能详的，就是我能想到的有一个就是1031 exchange。1031 exchange，那 Michael 关于1031 exchange，do you have anything to remind our audience?
Yes. The key thing about the 1031 exchange, of course, is to set it up properly. And generally, what you need to do in this situation is talk to an exchange agent. This is generally kind of a wing of a title company, escrow company, and there's a number of these like 1031, I think EPX. So there's these different companies that do it. Approaching them early and working with them on how to do it is the key thing, because the transaction is so regulated by time and how the escrows flow and close. It's best to just use the company that does this, which is essentially a wing of the title company, and they will guide you of how to season the transaction properly. Season 1031 only works for income producing property. I can't do it home to home to home. I can't 1031 exchange homes that are primary residences unless I move out and then rent it for a year to maybe 2 years, season it. They will guide you how to do that. So I would just say that's one, that there is a line of professionals that are experts. They'll guide you.
所以1031的话，一个重点就是你要找专业的1031的机构，专业的人士做专业的事情啊，就不要自己在瞎搞。如果这个不是一个特别，就是虽然专业的人他做起来可能是很快就做完，也是就是 effortless，但是如果说你是第一次来做的话，你千万不要这个找不专业的人士，或者说 try to do it yourself，这个是不可能的，就是一定要找这个1031专业的机构来帮忙。那 other than 1031 exchange, any other method you can think of to
Yes.
for capital gain tax planning？ 就是请 Michael 介绍一下，除了1031之外，还有什么其他的方法？
There are two. The latter one I'll say is a joke. The earlier one is charitable remainder trust. Charitable remainder trust is a structure where if I have a lot of built-in capital gain, either because I received it as a gift or I just bought it really low and it increased very much, or I've owned it a long time and I've depreciated all of the basis out because I've taken depreciation for 20 years out of a 30-year life, so 2/3 of the basis have been eroded. If I'm the right age and we have the right factors, I could contribute it to a charitable remainder trust. That trust sells it, and then the trust will pay me a stream of income, and I'll spread the capital gains over 10 years, 20 years, or my lifetime. You'd calculate it out. And I get a little bit of a charitable deduction for doing that. It also has to do with an element of life insurance. So I protect the item in case I pass away, because again, if I pass away, the bottom of the charitable remainder trust drops out, and then the asset goes to the charity. So there are ways to structure this well, but it can be a great tool to reduce and spread capital gains over time instead of one drop sale. And it also enables me the full amount instead of paying, potentially, a third or so in capital gains taxes federally. I can hold that third and enjoy basically the earnings off of that before spreading it through taxes. Just be careful. California doesn't conform on this for charitable remainder trust. So California taxes, you do need to pay that because it's a non-conforming state for this, but it can play a great role. The other thing that one could do, and I say it tongue in cheek, and it's Halloween, so I guess I can say this. The other way is hold the property and die. Great way to avoid capital gains taxes. Dark, but very effective. So I was dealing with a client, great client, didn't follow my advice. This is what happened. Elderly mother lived in the house, was living in the house, really needed assisted living. They were putting it off. They say, okay, she needs to do assisted living. And their bright idea was, they said, let's sell the house and use that money to pay for the mother's assisted living. Of course, I said, this tax-wise, that's not the way to do it. You should look into borrowing, maybe getting a reverse mortgage, doing, try to figure this out. Tax-wise, that's not a good idea. They said, no, we really need to do this. Who knows how long she'll live? Sadly, not long at all. This was March of last year, I think, sold the house like March 1st. They sold it because it was still mom, the original owner, living. That's a closed transaction during her lifetime. She pays capital gains on all the gain. That transaction closed. And then by about March 28th, she died. If you waited 29 days and everyone inherited the property, the step up in basis, the 1014 step up in basis, would have washed out all the capital gains. The estate would have paid 0 in capital gains. Instead, it paid substantial capital gains. So this is another thing, like Prop 19, think through one's real estate portfolio and one's investment portfolio. The worst thing one can do for older people is suddenly start liquidating all the capital assets, because if you just wait, it will receive a step up in basis and you'll wash out the capital gains, including depreciation recapture. So I could have essentially owned the property, used depreciation to reduce my income taxes all of my lifetime, and then I pass away, the asset passes through my revocable living trust, it gets a step up in basis, and then my kids sell it, and essentially nobody paid capital gains on that. And during the time that we were eroding basis, we were lowering the income tax off the rental. So that's something to think about when one's planning not just the estate plan in the legal sense, but also thinking, well, what are we going to do with these properties? And think twice. I'd say, friends don't let friends drive drunk. Friends don't let friends sell capital assets without thinking about it. Because if you sell a capital asset, I get this every year. Actually, we're just starting the time of year where it starts to flood in, where people say, hey, I sold that thing earlier in the year, Mike. What can I do about my taxes? And we have not much, because you already sold it. You have to think before you sell it. How are you going to do this? Is selling it the right strategy? Do we sell it with a charitable remainder trust? Do we do a 1031 exchange? Do we do a sale and then we do a charitable lead trust to try to ameliorate taxes? We got to do that in advance. Now, when we're almost November and then December, there is very little for me to do when there's a whole pile of money there. And then the accountant usually says, you're going to pay estimated taxes on that. And people say, oh, that's bad. What do I do to reduce this? It's tough.
I have to agree. Every year in November and December, I have people come to us and ask us for tax planning, but they already sold the stocks, they already sold their real estates, and they already realized the capital gain. And now they're looking for tax advice and tax planning strategies. And that's really, really difficult for us because there's nothing we can do for the client.
You can't structure the transaction. There are some things with like qualified opportunity zone that you can sometimes like try to make it better, but qualified opportunity zone, a lot of people, the opportunity zone, the reason why it's a qualified opportunity zone is oftentimes people don't want to invest in there ordinarily. So, there's complexity to it.
Yeah. 就 recapture 一下刚才 Michael 讲的，一个是 CRT Charitable Remainder Trust 的慈善信托，这个相信以前听过我们讲座的朋友已经不陌生了。这个是一个常见的，也是一个非常非常被 IRS 认可的一类啊。如果说你的这个 capital gain tax 很高的话，可以考虑的一个 structure。但是一般呢，刚才 Michael 讲到的就是说，如果做这类 planning 的话，一般来讲，客户的年龄可能不能太大。如果你的年纪太大的话，没有办法去购买人寿保险，一般我们不太去推荐，因为这类信托一般我们都会建议客户考虑和人寿保险相结合的。至于是什么原因，这个具体怎么去操作这些，如果说有具体的问题，我们会跟客户去做具体的一个咨询。但是就是这个要 keep in mind， 就是它是比较讲究，你的年龄、时机这样去计算啊，是一个非常我们可以给你具体到数字计算的这样的一种 planning， 但是对于有一些客户来说，他就是喜欢这种 planning 它的可预见性，然后而且非常的安全啊 CRT。那另外一个 Michael 讲的就是说他说他是在开玩笑，但是实际上这个我们遇到的也是很多的一个情况，就是说刚才我有讲 capital gain 它的计算的方法是 fair market value 去减去 basis， 那 fair market value 可能你没有办法，就是你去评估你的房子的价值，但是 basis 的话，是可以在这个方面呢是可以去有改变的。那它的改变呢，就是大家可能也听过有一个叫做 step up basis 的这样的一个概念，就是人在去世的时候，你的房子的税。房子的这个当时你的房子的这个税基是会变成说你当时去世的时候的房子的 fair market value，就大概是这样的一个概念了。所以如果你的税基增加到 fair market value 的话，那你的 heir， 你的继承人在卖房的时候，那他 realize 的 capital gain 可能是0 ，compare to 如果你在你生前你把这个房子给卖掉。那你的 capital gain 可能是非常非常大的一个 increase，所以这个就是要特别的要注意啊，就是之前有案例 Michael 刚才也分享了，就是人这个把房子刚卖掉完了之后，这个要付很大的一笔税，但是人很快就去世了，那你要交这么大的一笔税，那实际上这也是我觉得没有得到很好的 legal and tax advice 的一个我们不想见到的一个 consequence， 一个结果啊。OK，那刚才给大家介绍了一些这个地税、收入税， 还有包括资产增值税这个部分。那接下来到第4个部分，也就是我们最常给客户去做规划的一个税啊，这个也是我们特别的非常 specialized 的tax gift and estate tax。我们到今天这个最后的一个部分，那在这个部分呢，我们想请 Michael 先简单的给大家介绍，因为我们经常会遇到的一个就是很多朋友他非常 confused， 就是 gift and estate tax 为什么 we always talk about these two taxes together。What's the relationship between gift and estate tax in the US?
Yes. So the gift and estate tax are harmonized and are operated together in the same area of the code using interlocking provisions. And the reason for this is because the people at the IRS are not fools. And they've been doing this. The gift and estate tax has been around and part of the U.S. taxing system for actually a very long time. As you know, since the 16th Amendment, we've had this tax. So this has been around a long time. So why is the gift and estate tax harmonized? Well, if I tax property of the estate when I'm holding it and I die, what prevents me from saying, uh-oh, I don't feel so good. Joe, take this house. And then I die. I'm like, aha, it wasn't in my hands at the time that I died. You know, I beat you, IRS. IRS says, oh, no. We're not going to get beaten that way. We're going to tax the transfer of assets via the estate, via the estate through administration of trust or through in probate distributions, or we're going to tax lifetime gifts as they occur during a lifetime. So we have an exemption amount that is the estate gift lifetime exemption amount. And this exemption covers the things that the assets that I'm holding, that I own when I pass away. And it is reduced by the amount of taxable gifts that I make during my lifetime. So right now, the exemption is very high, $12,900,000.
Almost 13 million.
Yeah, quite high. It will sunset automatically by operation of law, and it will go back down about maybe 6 million, 7 million at the end of 2025. So December 31st, 2025 at midnight, we go into 2026, it drops down and it will be about 6 million per individual. And again, essentially the way that it works is if I have a $3 million house and I'm living, if I pass away and I descend it through my trust, I have $6 million of exemption. I have a $3 million asset. Subtract that out. I have $3 million of exemption left. No tax, no problem. The same way, if I gift the $3 million house during my lifetime, it is less than my lifetime exemption. No problem there. But be careful. Big star by this one. Carryover basis. So if I held the house and left it in my gross estate, and it went through my trust, and it went to the beneficiaries of the trust, because it passed by operation of my passing, my death, it gets a step up in basis. The capital gain is washed out. But if I give the asset to my beneficiary while I'm living, no step up in basis. There's carryover basis in that situation. So that beneficiary who gets the gift of the house has the same basis as me. So it is better in a number of situations to allow the asset to pass through my estate rather than being gifted. So one has to be careful with that. Make the example a little bit more complicated. If my exemption, again, we'll say $6 million, if during my lifetime I make a major taxable gift of $4 million to the beneficiary, I just give $4 million cash, that reduces my lifetime exemption to $2 million. I still have assets. I grow my assets to $4 million. When I pass away, there's $2 million exposed. $2 million is exempt, $2 million is exposed, and I will be subject to the tax. So this is a complicated area that essentially generally warrants a lot of planning, because unlike the income tax, which is hard to plan for because you only have 365 days and you have a limited number of transactions you can do, for estate and gift planning, you have your entire lifetime. You have an entire lifetime of transactions you can do. So you can do things such as use the annual exclusion. Annually, you can grant $17,000 per person, so per grantor. Husband, 17,000, wife, another 17,000. So now we're at 34,000 per grantee, child 1, 34, child 2, 34. Now we're at 68,000. Even 2 kids, I can get 68,000 out per year, and I'm not even touching the lifetime exclusion. This is classically how things like life insurance trusts operate. We leverage something like this to do that. But it can work with fractional interests of companies or things like that. We can also do that. So there are a number of techniques that can be done for the estate gift, but really the key things that I would recommend everybody remembering is the estate gift tax is harmonized. So be careful when you gift, because if you gift, there's carryover basis. And then you also have to be careful to use your annual lifetime exclusion. A question came in, but I'd like to answer it just because it's apropos of what we're talking about. Or shall I wait?
Oh, I think let's wait for the questions.
Oh, sure. Great.
Yeah,
We'll just,
I think
please feel free to type questions into the Q&A. We'll answer them at the end.
Yes，对，所以我再给大家总结一下关于赠与税和遗产税，这里面有一个特别重要的概念，就是说，我在和客户咨询的时候，我发现很多人不太明白的，就是说，到底赠与税和遗产税是什么关系？就在美国是这样子的一个概念，就是如果说你每一年你的赠与的额度如果超出了法律给予你的，刚才 Michael 说17000块钱的这个免算终身免税额的额度的话，那你赠与给任何一个人，包括你赠与给你的信托，不可撤销信托啊，这里我们讲的是不可撤销信托，和这个可撤销生前信托，我们刚才讲的这种 planning 是没有关系的。就是只要你把它赠与给除了你以外的其他的人的话，这个都是要算到你的终身的免税额里面的。如果说你在你的 lifetime， 你在有生之年，你把你的全部的终身的免税额都给用光的话，到你去世的时候，你的所有的资产，你的剩下的这些资产遗产的话，都会要缴纳遗产税，而遗产税的它的percentage 是高达40%。比如说举一个例子，就是现在目前每个人，当然这个额度是很高的，一个人是大概1300万的免税额，夫妻2个人可以有2600万，但是到了2026年1月1日之后，这个额度呢就会降到每个人600万，夫妻2个人大概1200万、1300万左右的这个情况。如果是这种情况的话，那可能很多的人在湾区，我们持有房产的人都会有遗产税的问题。那如果说你有遗产税的问题，你就要去考虑去做一些规划，尤其是在2026年1月1日之前，现在的高免税额度，实际上你是有很多的一些 opportunities 的。但是我们所说的这种规划，有的时候不见得说你的这个规划就是针对于你的房产的规划，因为房产本身，刚才 Michael 也讲了，然后我们整个的这个讲座也有跟大家讲，其实你要考虑的因素实在是太多了啊，除了这个遗产税和赠与税的问题之外，你还要考虑，我觉得非常unique的就是这个地税的问题。你像我们一开始就讲，如果你地税被重新评估在你有生之年，这个也是一个很大的一个问题，你需要去考量的。另外，刚才 Michael 也built in 它的 analysis 里面的还有就是这个关于 basis、carry over basis 这样的一系列问题，所以你的规划可能不是说就针对于，就是一定要是房地产的这个资产，因为可能很多人除了房产之外的话，他还有其他的资产，包括说如果你现在还没有，但是在这个阶段，你通过一定的diversification， 你通过 diversify 你的 assets， 你也可以去做一些关于遗产税的规划，这个都是可以的。所以我们今天只是可能把这个概念抛给大家，那具体的根据每个人实际的情况，这个你还可以去做一些不同的一些规划了。那我们今天主要讲座的这个 内容大概就到这里了啊，因为已经是1个小时的时间了。那我们请美婷把我们下一次11月份讲座的内容分享给大家。那我刚才在讲座的过程当中，我已经有跟大家去分享一下，就是在11月份，因为11月份最后一周实际上是感恩节那个周4，所以呢我们会把讲座给提到前一周，也就是应该是大概是11月第2周吧，11月12号我记得，那一周呢我们会给大家去做一个关于 charitable giving 的一个讲座，就是如果说你想要去sorry，我日期说错了，是11月16号，11月16号的晚上的7点半，关于慈善捐赠有哪些的 structure 你可以去考虑，以及如何去做慈善的捐赠，可以帮你去节税，但同时呢也为社会去做一些贡献。如果说你今天讲座有任何的问题的话，你可以把它，我们是不会打开麦克风的，所以你有任何的问题，你可以打到 Q&A 的那个 chat box 里面。那我们会，接下来用大概5到10分钟的时间，给大家解答问题。如果说你没有任何问题的话呢，你就可以下线了。那美婷也可以把我们的联系方式分享给所有的小伙伴们，如果说你有任何的问题的话，你可以联系我们，通过电话、短信或者甚至微信的方式也可以联系我们，可以跟我们来咨询。那如果说你没有任何问题，你可以下线。如果有问题的话呢，那接下来我们就是一个Q&A 的时间。在我们先解答这个对话框的问题之前呢，其实在我们讲座之前就有收到过问题，那我们先把这2个问题先回答一下啊。所以有一个朋友问 Michael，a parent transfers her rental property into a partnership, then no setup basis when her son inherits the property. Can I guess it's can you write some can I write some provisions in the living trust to make the rental property be taken out of the partnership just before the parent dies? So when son inherits the property, he has setup basis for the property. Can you answer this question?
So this one, I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding, and it depends how the partnership is operating. So whether it's a 1065 partnership or it's more like an S corp, but generally under 754 of the code, outside basis can be transferred to inside basis. So for example, if I have let's say a husband and wife LLC, and we're doing 1065 partnership, and let's say husband passes away, as community property, that asset for my wife receives a step up in basis, the whole thing, the interest of both parties, because the LLC's a community property asset. That steps up outside basis. Under 754 of the code, you can pass outside basis to inside basis if you make the election. So essentially what this is, you don't necessarily need some provision in the trust to do this. It's really more of a tax reporting issue with you and your or with the accountant and the surviving spouse, passing inside basis to outside basis. Passing outside basis to inside basis. If you have a partnership with third parties, this is more complicated. So if it's with my brother and sister, and we're a third, and I pass away, passing outside basis to inside basis is more complicated because only a third is going to increase on that situation, and it's going to depend who's the beneficiary. So I would say this would be something that in depth you would want to explore a bit with the accountants and the 754 election.
Okay. Okay, the second question is, for real property inheritance, does the law still allow minority interest discount?
Yes, generally that still is allowable. You have to do evaluation with a valuation professional and essentially an appraiser, but this isn't entirely ruled out thus far.
Okay. Great, thanks, Michael. Okay, now let's move on to the questions in the chat box. So the first one is, my late parents' house is titled to their trust. Me and the 3 other siblings are beneficiaries on the property. I like to sell my share to my niece. What's the procedure and tax implications?
This is a complicated one. I would just leave it at this: is that, for firm advice, see a professional like us, and get specific guidance for your situation. I would just say, generally, in an academic sense, broad brush, that's not guiding you on what to do. When this transfers from parents to the children, unless any of the children are going to live there, you're maybe not going to be able to keep the property tax basis. So if that's the situation, there might be a reassessment there. If there's a reassessment, then that's just the way that's going to be for local property taxes. Moving to the capital gains situation, on the passing of the parents, when they pass, that should have caused the step up in basis. So it should be fair market value at the date of their passing. Critically, in terms of administration, you should get an appraisal. You also should do the administration of the trust and determine with the administration of the trust, is the trust going to pass the asset out of the trust to the 3 siblings, or let's say the 4 siblings, directly as, let's say, tenants in common, or perhaps joint tenants. And then it would likely be tenants in common, and then you're going to do a sale to the niece that way, or are you going to do it intra-trust? There's a lot of ways to do it. Some ways are better from a title perspective, but it may cause some various documentary transfer tax. So this is a really, really complicated one that you need specific guidance on.
I think the key thing is the trustee, the successor trustee. Now the trustee probably needs some guidance in how to administer this trust to achieve the best legal and tax consequences. Yeah. I think that's very important. I think, in this situation, to get very good guidance on tax is important. And providing, of course, the siblings can get along. They are willing to work with each other.
Yes.
Okay. Next one is, what is double cost? I guess I think it's double setup basis for assets owned by a couple. How does it work?
Yes. So this is the one good thing of being in a community property state. So if you're in a community property state, because property is deemed to be owned by the whole of the community, when I own property with my spouse, when I pass away, all of our community property, 100% gets stepped up in basis, all the community property. So if we have rentals and we have non-retirement stock and all of these things, I pass away, everything gets a step up in basis to the fair market value on the date that I die. Not just my half, all of it gets stepped up 100%. So my wife could liquidate everything and she'd pay no capital gains tax. And then maybe she liquidates everything and then she buys new stuff. And then she lives a long life and she's taking a lot of depreciation and she has a lot of built-in capital gains. She passes away. It's stepped up again 100%. So it stepped up 100% the first time, and then it stepped up again the passing of my wife. This applies to community property assets of a married couple. You say, oh, it's me and my girlfriend. Nope, doesn't apply. You're not married. No marital community. I live in New York State. Doesn't apply. Not community property. You have to be in a community property state, and you have to be married and forming the marital community, and it has to be as to community property. You say, what about that separate property house that I received as an inheritance from my parents, and I held in a separate trust that I keep as my separate property and then goes to my children, bypassing my wife upon my death? no double step up in basis. It would just be a step up in basis on my death, and then it descends to the other person. It's not community property. So we get the step up in basis only on my death. But let's say I have that separate property house in that separate trust, and my wife passes away. My basis is the same. If it was community property, the basis would go up. So there are some situations of a very harmonious couple that say, oh, I inherit that separate property house. I say, oh, that house, let's say we're young, at a certain point, I may want to consider doing a community property agreement, or basically the community property declaration, where I say, actually, I'm going to let that be community property. It's going to be marital property. And then if my spouse passes away, that will get the step up in basis, and we won't have to pay the property tax, or to pay the step up in basis there. So there's a follow-up question about this, how to report the step up in basis to the IRS. There aren't specific forms to file. It's a position you take on the tax return that there's a step up in basis. The key thing is to get appraisals and to make sure the titles are right. So if you own as husband and wife, do you own as husband and wife as community, and then your revocable living trust, then you're okay. If you have something as a single name, you may have a little bit of an issue because there may be you'll need to explain why are you applying the community property rules to this.
Okay. I think we'll just do the last question because it's already 8:47. This last question is have you heard of deferred sales trust? I think some financial advisors
Yes.
recommend deferred sales trust as an alternative of 1031 exchange. How does it work?
Yes. So the deferred sales trust is basically establishing an irrevocable trust, and essentially it's a sale over time. It's almost like seller carryback financing, but essentially you have a situation where the rather than the buyer paying the buyer paying the seller immediately the $1 million, there's a situation where the deferred sale is done through a trust, and the seller receives the stream of income over time. It can be a potentially good technique. One just has to be aware that it is not a risk-free technique. It is not a technique that is perfectly blessed by the IRS. It's not disliked by the IRS necessarily, but it is one that it is not something like, let's say, charitable remainder trust, where you can look at the regulations and say, IRS, you specifically allowed me to do this. There's a safe harbor that if I do it exactly the way that you tell me to do it, I'm safe. Deferred sales trust is a little bit more complicated.
Okay, great. Thank you, Michael. OK， 那今天我们的讲座呢就到这里，已经是很晚了哈。祝大家有一个愉快的晚上。那我们下个月再和大家在网上相聚。
Good night, all. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.